The Fires of Ryloth. =RK=. Part 3. General Vale's Office, Gar High Command, Coruscant. I was checking for one last time the finalized list of forces dedicated to Operation Retribution, the plan to liberate Ryloth. 8 Venator cruisers, which included all of those under my command, the 3 still active from Skywalker's fleet and 2 more ships, the brand new Conviction and the Coruscant's Pride. Those as well as 4 acclimators and 16 frigates were dedicated as the strike force that would break the blockade over Ryloth and make way for the ground component of the invasion. That would be 10 additional acclimators under the command of Kenobi's negotiator. 211,000 clone troopers and support personnel. 800 LARTs. 457 armored walkers and 360 self-propelled artillery pieces as well as thousands of speeders. All of them counted on me to get them safely to the ground. Yeah, lucky me. I was granted my wish and would be the overall commander of the operation. Part of it was my actual combat experience. The other, it was deemed healthy for my future if I was away from Coruscant for the foreseeable future. Thanks to a few statements and carefully leaked pieces of information, most Republic citizens were thrilled with me. As it turned out, the common folks on the streets liked the fact that I placed their well-being before that of their senators. Most of the surviving politicians on the other hand were not too thrilled with me. I think that a lot of them hoped that I would get myself killed one of these days, and they were insisting that I'd be given a battlefield command as soon as possible. Preferably far from Coruscant. Of course, none of them said that they actually wanted to send me on the first available suicide mission, but their true sentiments were obvious. Ironically enough, I did have more than a few supporters within the Senate remnants, men like Bella Bliss and most surprisingly, Padme Amidala, who was horrified when she awoke and found out what the body count was. The death toll in the Senate alone was more than 34,000, most of whom died before the assault I led. That little fact went a long way proving to those who were willing to listen that my actions were justified. Before I merged with the ghost of Darth Vader, what happened that day would have given me nightmares for a long time. The other reason Senator Amidala started changing her worldview was what happened on Naboo. Despite the cure, the planet would be under quarantine for at least a year, perhaps much longer. The worst thing was the number of people who perished before sufficient quantities of the cure could be manufactured and distributed. In Theed alone, more than 1.7 million people died from the Blue Shadow. The numbers were still coming in. The experts expected at least 2 million dead as direct casualties from the bioweapon. I looked over the numbers once again and nodded to myself. Those troops should be sufficient in the short term. I hoped that Valentra would be able to scrounge a second echelon to help liberate the planet. A few more capital ships to keep away enemy reinforcements wouldn't go amiss either. =RK=. General Valentra's Office, Gar High Command, Coruscant. I sipped from a mug filled with a steaming CF and took a deep breath of the invigorating aroma. From the other side of his desk, which was covered with various data pads, General Valentra was doing the same. The graying Zabrak placed down his cup and scanned the finalized troop list for Operation Retribution. A deep frown creased his face. Finding all that hardware in the time required will be tough. The so-called chameleon paint is out of the questions. There is some kind of bottleneck with its production, and all we have as well as the equipment needed to reapply it on armor is tasked for the Special Forces Command, SFC. That is unpleasant, I muttered. With the standard white color, my boys will stick out on Ryloth like Jedi in a Twi'lek massaging parlor. What that meant was self-explanatory. It was the Coruscant's slang for your friendly, local whorehouse. My commanding officer smirked at that image. That all-white foolishness is over. We are changing the basic color schemes of the Gar armors to dark gray and black, except for the places where it is useful as a camo. However, there is one thing that we can't fix for the moment, he grumbled. If his expression was anything to judge by, someone should have found himself at the nastiest assignment the army had over it, whatever it was. The damn color coding on the clone officer's armor, he spat in disgust. Oh, that was something I loathed. Its only purpose was to tell the cis snipers who to shoot. As one could expect, those criffing bastards had a field day with it. We are obliged by our contract with Camino to keep it, the general hissed. I blinked at him owlishly. He was joking, right? He saw my incredulous expression and smiled grimly. I'm not pulling your leg, Delcatar. Master Shark T is in talks with the Camino government in attempt to resolve the issue. It appears that their leaders see the clones just as another piece of equipment, and don't seem to understand what is the problem with the armor color coding. I could hear the distaste in his voice. Of all the bloody, stupid things. Goddamned politicians. I really wanted to have few minutes alone with those idiots. On the bright side, the general was obviously disgusted by the way some people treated the clones. That was reassuring. I could use that. I take it that bad things happen if we just disregard that piece of the contract and leave the politicians to deal with the aftermath? I innocently asked. He snorted in amusement. That was my first reaction too. But no. Not if we want the amount of clones we need at prices that the Republic can afford. He grumbled. Those are people, damn it. Not pieces of equipment, he exclaimed. I nodded. All too true, my friend. Perhaps we can somewhat mitigate our reliance on Camino for manpower. I must. There are a few generals and worlds that are raising militia as their armed forces. Not everyone trusts the clones. Which was smart, all things considered. At this stage I was probably the only guard general who could trust the clones under his command. After all, I had removed their mental conditioning. That's a start, but we need much more than just planetary militias. Such formations could be sufficient as PDF forces, to help defend their respective homeworlds. The Republic as a whole needs more. The times when things could go on without a standing army or a true combat navy are over, I said. Talar drank his CF and nodded in agreement. We need an aggressive recruitment campaign for both the Republic Army and Navy, he said thoughtfully. After the way you handled the media in the aftermath of the Coruscant attacks, perhaps you should ask the citizens of the Republic to enlist. He smiled at me. Another PR campaign. I grumbled. However, I saw his point. Right now my popularity within the Republic was second only to Palpatine, and that was only thanks to the sympathy he got for his wounds. I saw a date with the Army PR department in my near future and recording some recruitment clips. Now, about the additions you want for the standard infantry equipment, and the changes in our armored forces doctrine. == Republica 500, Coruscant. Anakin hurried towards his wife's flat. He intended to move quietly, so he wouldn't awake her, but when he came near the apartment he could clearly sense that she was still up. He let himself in and moved in the direction of her presence. Padme was sitting on a couch in the dark living room. The only light in there came from the lights of nearby building, few passing aircars, and from the datapad, which occupied her attention. Anakin, who was at the living room's door, smiled softly at his wife. "Hey, Angel," he whispered. Padme turned her head so she could see him and rewarded his presence with a small, sad smile. She refused to show him the left side of her face, despite that he had seen her scar many times during the last week. However, aside from a brief time they had on Vale's flagship, this was the only time that they were alone since she was wounded in the Senate attacks. "Arnie," she whispered quietly. Anakin frowned. He might not be the brightest fella out there, but did he ever give his wife a reason to doubt his love? It wasn't like that a little scar could change the way he felt about her. She was the best thing to ever happen to him. "Now, love. We'll have none of that." He stalked towards the couch and knelt in front of Padme. Anakin used his real arm to gently grasp her soft chin and carefully turned her head so he can see her whole face. An angry red scar emanated from the middle of her jawbone and spread across her cheek until it almost reached her ear. It strangely resembled the branches of a tree. Padme grimaced when Anakin stared at her disfigured face. Then she gasped when he gently kissed her scarred cheek. "Is that all?" Anakin gave her a careless, boyish smile. "As if something like this could make me love you less." "Arnie, I'm..." Padme tried to speak but was interrupted by a soft, index finger touching her lips. "Padme, you are as beautiful as ever, my love." His finger was replaced by a pair of searching lips. She moaned, as a wave of heat raised within her, and Padme leaned forward, needing more contact with her husband. Anakin smirked with satisfaction and deepened the kiss. It was hours before either of them was in a state to talk again. Shortly before sunrise, the married couple found themselves in Padme's bed, with only a thin, silky sheet covering their intertwined, naked bodies. "You are about to leave again," pouted Padme. It was Anakin's turn to smile sadly. He would have preferred to stay that way, instead of heading to his ship in orbit, but that was not to be. Something both of them knew, not that it prevented them from wishing it to be otherwise. "Unfortunately, I am damn good at what I do," Skywalker declared bashfully. Padme gave him a brief, content smile, which expressed her thoughts on the subject. "That you are, dear," she cuddled next to his chest and whispered fiercely. "Be careful, you hear me? I want you back in one piece." Aye, Mom," answered Anakin and kissed her passionately. He was one of the last men to report to the fleet in orbit. =RK=, Sys Council chambers, location classified. Multiple beings, some of whom were more machine than organic, were assembled around a long table. Most of them looked understandably nervous. From a massive hollow projector, they watched a news cover of the events that occurred on Coruscant few days ago. Every one of them had a datapad in front of them, showing the Sys intelligence reports about the debacle on the Republic's capital. One they authorized, or so most of them thought. "What in the name of all the galaxy's credits is this?" shouted Sandhill, the chairman of the intergalactic banking clan, and through the datapad he had been reading at the table. The inoffensive piece of equipment shattered over the metal surface. Voros Argyle, the new Neimoidian viceroy, could not help but agree to the sentiment. In the next few minutes accusations flew left, right and center, while the politicians were blaming each other for the debacle. Duke Poggle the Lesser cursed in his clicking native language, grabbed his walking stick, which he had left leaning to his chair, and used it to strike the table as if it was a gong. "Enough," he shouted in a heavily accented, but nonetheless understandable basic. His uncharacteristic actions were shocking enough to shut up the crowd of cowards which was supposed to lead the Confederation. "Despite all that happened on Coruscant, our armies are still winning. Even in the few battles we've lost, the Republic has been hurt. We'll have at least one more year of nearly unchallenged strategic superiority until our enemies could fully mobilize. Total victory is in our grasp," he declared. "Unless your squabbling leads to the Confederation's fracturing." After those madmen unleashed both Blue Shadow and even a gas attack on Coruscant itself, we have no other choice. Now it is victory or death for every one of us, shouted the old insectoid. "Our esteemed colleague is correct," declared Argyle. His words were the only thing interrupting the silence following Poggle's statement. "We are now forced into a different kind of war. None of us can change what happened. However, we need to know how such madness came to be. Those were our people on Coruscant, yet they grossly overstepped their orders." A shadow separated from one of the conference room's dark corners. It was soon revealed to be a tall woman, who was mostly hidden by a dark cloak. Only her full lips and the blue lower part of her face were visible. "Perhaps I could shed some light on the events on our enemy's capital." Her sensual voice floated through the room. "By all means, go on, my lady." Poggle gave her a respectful nod. She was the nominal leader of Count Dooku's acolytes, and no one in his right mind wanted to mess with them. Especially with this one, who was probably the most competent and dangerous of them all. "My agents uncovered that the orders sent to the operatives we used for the Coruscant operations were altered. Additional equipment was provided, enough blue shadows to paralyze 2 of the military bases on the planet as well as the gas used on the senators. It all came from our stocks with council authorization." She almost purred, enjoying the horrified looks and the terror she could feel from many of the beings in the room. "I trust that you'll find and deal appropriately with the ones responsible?" asked the Geonosian Duke. "But of course, my dear Poggle. It will be my pleasure." She almost sang with joy. "That disaster aside, what would we do concerning the public's reaction? If we don't strongly denounce the attacks, many of our own citizens may stop supporting us," said Argyle. He turned to the holographic image of Wyatt Tambor. "The stunt you are pulling off on Ryloth won't help us where that matter is concerned." The foreman of the Techno-Union bristled at that. This Neimoidian had the gall to challenge his brilliant idea. "My plan secured us the support of the Hutts, something that can't be overstated. Now we can use their territory with impunity. Not only that, but they have provided our cause with a lot of mercenaries, many of whom have their own ships. Already I have a small fleet of privateers and thousands of men on the ground, here on Ryloth. Not to mention the killing you are making selling them weapons." Someone muttered not too quietly. Pasalagine smirked. He and his corporate friends were making a fortune selling drugs directly to the Hutts, now that a middleman was no longer needed. It's already done. For your sake, let's hope that those criminals' contribution would make up for the outrage our Confederacy will be receiving over your actions there. Shui Mai from the Commerce Guild chided Tambor. We need to make a statement declaring the perpetrators of the attacks a rogue element, declared Poggle. For once there was a universal agreement between the council members. The Fires of Ryloth. =RK=. Part 4. Republic Cruiser Requiem, Task Force Retribution Flagship, Hyperspace. She was bored. Really bored. All the channels the small holoprojector in her room could get were showing the same things, again and again. Or they were speculating about the consequences of the attacks on Coruscant. She knew more about the SIS operation on the planet than the reporters anyway, so she had to speak with those folks from Republic Intelligence for days. What was wrong with them anyway? She told them the truth as she knew it the first time, and the second, and the third. She lost count how many times she had to repeat it. But they continued asking the same questions, day after day, until she was tempted to force-choke them to death. That would at least be interesting, right? The blue-skinned woman pouted. If this was it, living was overrated. The bland routine was driving her insane. Where was that man, the one who saved her, anyway? He promised that he'll talk with her soon. She had met him for a couple of minutes after she awoke. Then he somehow managed to persuade her to speak with those people from Republic Intelligence and then disappeared. Men. She glanced at the image shown by the holoprojector. It showed the domed building she thought was the Republic's Senate and dozens of small specks swarming it. It was showing how the clones assaulting it. Again. Her head whipped around and her mismatched eyes stared at the sealed door which slid into the walls with a quiet hiss. "Hi. We finally have some time to catch up," said the man who had saved her, and then sent her to this hellish boredom. She felt his presence in the Force. It called to something dark deep inside her. She heard a seductive whisper before everything went red. She smiled, relishing in the feeling of power coursing through her very being. A growl escaped her lips before she sent a telekinetic push his way. =RK=. Republic Cruiser Requiem, Task Force Retribution Flagship, Hyperspace, 20 minutes earlier. I smirked at Jabo, who waited impatiently next to the workbench over which I was working. The kid wanted some serious training, so I decided to oblige him. The last component of the device I was finishing slid in place with a quiet click. "It's done," I declared cheerfully. I used telekinesis to levitate the short cylinder, made of dull gray metal, to the expectant hands of the kid. "A lightsaber? Cool," he exclaimed and grabbed it from my intangible grasp. Jabo wasted no time in pressing the weapon's activation button. A vibrant, azure blade came to life with the characteristic snap hiss of a lightsaber. He stared at it and his brilliant smile fell. Jabo pouted at me. "It's blue," he stated the obvious. "You are a Sith, right? And I'm supposed to be your apprentice. So why is it blue?" he asked in accusing tone. I grinned at the kid like the proverbial chest-higher cat. "You see, my young apprentice, while I may be a Sith, you are not. Not yet at any rate. Two things must happen first, for you to be one." I started lecturing my student. "First, you have to want to be a Sith, and frankly you don't know enough yet to make an educated decision. When the time comes that you know the basics, you'll have to make a choice." Jabo frowned at me. Obviously this was not what he expected. Tough. I had no intention of wasting him by taking the fastest and easiest path that usually ended with just another brute, someone who was little more than disposable shock trooper. That was not the kind of Sith I needed for the order I intended to build. "You are damn persistent with sending me back to school," Jabo grumbled. I chuckled. Oh, he had no idea. "Second, you have to earn the right to be called a Sith. But that is a topic for a later time. Now, you wanted some serious training, as you put it, didn't you? Oh, my foolish, young apprentice. You'll learn to be careful what you wish for. Sometimes it comes true." I gave him an evil smile with accompanying chuckle which made him take a hasty step back. I used the Force to manipulate the contents of a couple of lockers which were hugging the wall behind Jabo. Their doors snapped open and 6 fist-sized spheres flew out. They had small red blisters spread evenly over their surface. Oh, muttered my apprentice. The spheres darted forward and surrounded Jabo, floating about 1.5 meters over the floor. The average Jedi starts training with one of these toys. I naturally expect better of you. My smile grew wider. One of the balls sent a tiny, red bolt of energy at Jabo, who jumped out of the way, letting the attacker harmlessly splash on the ground. I've shown you how to access the Force. Let it flow through you, then use it to enhance your perception and reflexes. Soon enough you would be consistently seeing the attacks a moment before they occur. When you reach that stage, what you need to do is train your body to be able to keep up. Ouch, exclaimed Jabo after he was not fast enough in avoiding the next attack. Tisk. You have a training saber now, kid. Use it. He tried to parry the next attack, but missed, and started waving around his left hand, which was stinging from the hit. It hurts. He grumbled. It will keep you motivated to get the hang of it faster. Besides, you have stage 2 to look up to. I quipped. Do I even want to know? He exclaimed. This time 2 of the spheres shot at him. Jabo sidestepped one bolt and managed to interpose the blade of the training lightsaber in the path of the other attack, deflecting it at the ceiling. It was crude, but worked. That's the spirit. I cheered him. Just remember, next you'll have to do it with your eyes closed. I smirked. What? Jabo exclaimed, losing his concentration. Arg. Delkatar, you bastard, he shouted when 3 bolts struck him simultaneously. Have fun, kid. I left the grumbling Jabo to his fate and headed for a meeting I've postponed for more than long enough. Hey equals. Perhaps I should have made the time to visit my guest earlier. Much earlier. I could feel her frustration and boredom. Not a good combination for a Force adept, especially one whose training I suspected to be a hack job. Oh, boy. I had my work cut out for me. I nodded to the squad of clones guarding the room of the woman I saved and waited while they executed a security scan. They all knew better than becoming sloppy. I made sure of that. I really should have met her earlier. For the past week or so since she awoke, the Chiss female was known only as Azure, the code name given to her by Ree. Not terribly original. She needed a real name. At least she had managed to control herself, and the agents who interrogated her made it out of those interviews unscathed. Perhaps it was time for me to get myself a personal staff. There was only one of me and an eternally increasing mountain of paperwork that had to be done in order for my fleet to keep running. That was before the conception of Operation Retribution. Now, despite Piet being back from Naboo and doing excellent job as my aide, I was simply swamped. Even getting Viz to help didn't improve the situation. I lamented the days of the Empire when I could simply dump most of that never sufficiently damned paperwork on my minions. I frowned. That thought just reminded me that I didn't have minions anymore. Whose idea was that I should become a Republic general anyway? I wanted to have a chat with the bastard. Oh right, it was my idea. The scan was complete and the leader of the guard detachment nodded me to proceed. The door slid open, revealing a Spartan compartment. It had a small bed with a standard mattress, no particularly comfortable one at that, a desk which slid into the wall and a small stool. In the far end of the room, a hollow projector was tuned to a channel showing images of the assault on the Senate. The Chiss woman was sitting on the bed. The moment I entered, her head snapped my way and she stared at me. Hi. We finally have some time to catch up. I greeted her with a nervous smile on my face. I felt a tug through the Force, as if a void within me had become a bit less. It was hard to put the sensation into words. It was like the feeling of a Force bond forming. Yet it was so much more and at the same time, less. I felt the dark side trying to possess her, her spiking anger. The woman liked the sweet sensation of the energies running through her body. Then she attacked. I retaliated with stream of telekinetic energy which met her onslaught. Our attacks cancelled each other, producing a wave of displaced air in the process. It battered us in the form of a short-lived, but strong wind. That didn't deter her. She snarled and jumped at me. Sir, exclaimed one of the clones behind me. I could hear the clicks of disengaging safeties. I'll deal with the lady. Do not engage unless she attacks you, I ordered. If she was thinking coherently and had the necessary training to back up her ferocity, the Chiss woman could have been dangerous in hand-to-hand combat. As she was, she proved to be little more than a berserker who had slipped under the influence of the dark side. That was what made it so dangerous. One moment the woman was simply frustrated. In the next she had lost it. Not that it was surprising. I should have expected something like this. After all, the woman was supposed to be a one-shot, disposable weapon. The people who made her what she was didn't care for long-term consequences. She was supposed to be dead by now. It felt strange. As if I knew her every action before she tried to execute it. It was easy to counter her uncoordinated attacks. I used the back of my right hand to slap aside a wild swing before delivering a force-enhanced palm strike at her solar plexus. At the same time, my left hand caught her other fist, which tried to give me an impressive shiner. I used telekinesis to roughly pick up the gasping woman and slammed her in the far wall. She wheezed as the little air left in her lungs was forcibly pushed out. I felt the uncontrolled rage leaving her body as fast as it had overtaken her faculties and let the dazed woman to slide to the floor. The emergency is over, boys. The lady will behave from now on. Won't you, my dear? I asked her. Yeah. She wheezed. I could sense the fight draining out of her. She was more confused than anything else. The sergeant in charge of the squad shook his head. He was apparently not convinced. Can't blame him for doing his job. You liked the rush of power, I stated. During our short-lived skirmish, I could sense that she enjoyed the feeling of the dark side flowing through her. Hell, I usually loved the rush of the dark side when I used it too. But that was not the point right now. I knew what I was doing. She didn't. She studied me for a moment before nodding. We will have to work on this temper of yours, I grumbled. She blinked at me in confusion. There was an innocence in her eyes that one would not expect from the woman who led the attack on the Jedi Temple. Not to mention that before my arrival she did a reasonably good job thanks to our new connection, which I was shielding from my side so she wouldn't be able to take a stroll through my mind. I was able to see the truth of the matter. She was not faking it. Part of her really was just an innocent little girl. One that had a strong connection with the Force and an affinity to the dark side to both. What am I to do with you? I wondered aloud. Being a babysitter was definitely not on my schedule for the foreseeable future. She simply stared at me, but remained silent. After her little temper tantrum, it was clear that ignoring her was not an option. At least not a good one. She needed training, and I needed to make sure that she wouldn't be bored for long. Idle hands and all that. I gave her a reassuring smile. I should have listened to my own advice. At one point I wanted an apprentice, and now I had my hands full with a pair of them. Please sit on the bed. The floor has to be cold. I spoke softly to the girl in a woman's body. She sprang to her feet and jumped on the hard mattress. Good enough. You know, we can't continue calling you as you, or hey you. Her mismatched eyes stared at me. She simply didn't care one way or another. How do you want to be known from now on? She shrugged, as if it was not important. I could clearly sense her confusion. She was wondering what all that fuss was about. I once again had the sudden need to strangle the people who had made her the way she was today. Arya, I suddenly stated. The name just came to me out of the blue, yet it somehow felt right. It suited her. Arya Astra, I said a bit louder. How do you like it? It's just a name. She shrugged. She pursed her lips in thought and nodded. It will do, she said in a calm tone, one you would use to discuss the weather. Despite her outwards indifference, she liked the name. It resonated with something deep within her. That was something to pursue at a later date. When she trusted me more, I decided to change the topic. Arya, would you like to tell me what you taught about the Force? She bit her lower lip and mumbled something unintelligible. A bit louder please. Just how to grasp it. To let the dark side flow through me. Was my intelligent response. This was going to be a very long day. I could glimpse through our bond that this was more or less the truth. It raised my opinion about her potential even further. With that kind of knowledge that she had been given prior to her one-way mission to the temple, she should not have been able to use the Force in the way she actually did. A very long day indeed, however I just knew that it would be worth it in the end. The Fires of Ryloth. =RK=. Part 5. Conference Room Alpha, Republic Cruiser Requiem, Task Force Retribution Flagship, Dark Space, 5 light-years from Ryloth. The fleet is present and accounted for, sir. Reported Commodore Palion. Data links are established. Thank you, Gilad. He gave me a thoughtful nod. I could see him wondering why I had the fleet drop out of hyperspace short of our intended target. While his face was presenting me a dispassionate professional mask, I could see it in his eyes. He was pondering over various reasons that would force me to alter the plan in the last minute. Of course, he had no way to know that the main reason was very simple. Palpatine was briefed on the original plan, so I had no intention of following it. One after another, the fleet's captains appeared around the table. To my left were the ethereal images of Skywalker and Yularen. To the right, on the other side of the physically present Palian, was the ghostly figure of Obi-Wan, who was in charge of our ground component. Two-thirds of the officers gathered for this unscheduled meeting wore the same dark faces. "What is the emergency?" asked Anakin. "You'll see. You all know the plan to liberate Ryloth by heart," I declared to the assembled men and women. They all nodded at me, giving me a long-suffered looks, before nodding. "Well, you can forget all about it. I have reasons to believe that it was leaked to the Seps long before we left for our little excursion," I told them. Stunned silence reigned for the next few seconds. Then more than a few of my officers who didn't wear Jango Fett's face started shouting over each other. "Preposterous." The voice of Captain Krello Lomba rose over the rest. "Silence," I barked after listening to them for few seconds. The sharp tone of my voice made them take notice and they soon subdued. I glared at Captain Lomba. Figures. He was one of the political appointments within the Navy, whose main call to fame was his close friendship with the Ryloth senator, who in turn was a close friend and supporter of Palpatine. Just to make my life more difficult, said senator was on visit to Kuat during the attacks on Coruscant, so I couldn't just fire Lomba. I ignored him for the moment and gazed at the rest of my problem children. Luckily only he was the only one of them commanding a capital ship. The rest of his type were stuck on a dozen light cruisers. During the short time we had to plan Operation Retribution, the folks that would make trouble had made themselves known. At least most of them. I had suspicion about few more captains, but nothing concrete. It was not like I could choose the members of the fleet in this case. Unfortunately, that had left me with a small nucleus of officers in command positions who had gotten their rank thanks only to their political connections, and so far had evaded being sent to the front where their dubious competence could be tested. With this being the Republic Navy, I couldn't just dismiss them without cause, though if they fucked up sufficiently in the coming battle, their sorry asses were mine. On the other hand, if at least one or two of those turned out to be competent, then I could put them to good use. As we speak, the 5 CR-90 we have in the fleet, which are in scout configuration, are making a recon sweep of Ryloth and the Cis fleet blockading the planet. We'll receive their preliminary report in few minutes, I declared. "You know something," stated Kenobi, who had silently observed the short spectacle. I smiled at him. "I suspect," I said. "You all saw the intel we have about the present enemy forces. 1 Luckrey Hulk command ship, a Luckrey Hulk battleship, 12 munificents as well as 2 or 3 Luckrey Hulk freighters. That and 3 to 4,000 fighters, which would be the real threat. Our forces should be able to deal with that suffering light casualties." "We all know that. What's your point, General? Our fleet is an overkill against such an enemy," sneered Lomba. He was becoming an irritant. Too bad that he still hadn't crossed the line and went into insubordination so I could be finally rid of him. "What I expect is a significantly larger enemy force. That's why I did my best to gather such a powerful fleet for our excursion. It is the same force-damned reason we are cooling our heels light years from our target while the corvettes are scouting the opposition. And that is why I am allowing you to shut up, before you cross the line from arrogant idiotism straight into insubordination, Captain Lomba." I spoke with enough sarcasm to blister the paint from the walls. "You expect a trap," declared Yularen. I simply nodded. "This entire operation is suspect," I grimaced. "The Separatists would have realized from the beginning that such a large operation couldn't be missed, and we would be required to take action. They would have to be stupid not to see it, and considering that we can't afford to believe that they are, the only other conclusion is that they are setting up a trap. The question is, do they have the forces on hand to make it an effective one?" A light started blinking on the console built in the table in front of Palian's seat. He pressed few buttons, stared at the screen for few moments and winced, before being able to school his face back to his usual mask of professionalism. "Sir, the scout's preliminary report just came in," he said calmly. "By all means, Commodore, Enlighten us. Long-range scans detect 1 Luckrey Hulk command ship, 2 Luckrey Hulk battleships, 2 freighters of the same class and 20+ munificence. Grim silence fell over the room. If they don't have reinforcements waiting in space, we all know what the worst-case scenario is, I stated. Yeah. If those freighters are in fact battleships with full fighter complement, we'll have serious problems, said Anakin. That, with the second battleship, could give them up to 4,500 additional fighters, exclaimed Captain Lumber, who had become white as a sheet. Add another 1,000 or so vultures with the rest of the frigates, interjected Skywalker. It's unlikely that the Separatists had so much vultures to spare. One of his friends disagreed. 9 to 10,000 enemy fighters as a ballpark figure, muttered Kenobi. If the fleet is hit by all of them at once, someone muttered. Don't forget that they can have more fighters based on the planet. Kenobi decided to add his 2 cents. That's not something we are going to allow. I spoke loudly. Luckily for us, the vulture droids do not have hyperdrives. I smiled at the officers under my command. General Kenobi, when the main fleet starts its assault on Ryloth, I want the assault ships under your command to jump on a random destination in dark space within 5 light years of our target and wait for the signal. Just in case the Sis has an informant in the fleet and additional forces they can send against your ships. This is what we are going to do. =RK equals. Luckrey Hulk command ship procurer, Sis blockade over Ryloth. Captain Martuk was leaning forward in his command chair. Thanks to his data goggles, Wyatt Tambor, whose hologram was projected in front of him, could not see his narrowed eyes. Captain, are you ready? Asked the foreman of the Techno Union. The reinforcements arrived a few hours ago. Our trap is set. I have over 12,000 fighters waiting for the Republic fleet, answered Took. We know their forces, we know their plans. When they arrive, I'll have an unpleasant surprise for our uninvited guests. He smiled. I am counting on you, Captain. The Republic must not retake this planet. Even if they do, we must bleed them dry first. I'll see to it, said Took, before his nominal superior cut the connection. Not that any of us has much choice after what those criffing insane fools did on Coruscant. The Neimoidian hissed quietly. Once the news about what really happened on Coruscant circulated through the ranks, it became painfully obvious to all of them that they no longer had any choice except for victory or death. He doubted that the Republic would be in any mood for mercy, so he would grant them none. If only those accursed imbeciles hadn't used bioweapons, or at least had managed to be competent enough to just kill off the Senate rather than play stupid games, then the situation would be different. However, that was not to be. He sighed. The war was already changing, and at least some elements of the Sis with it. While he personally didn't care for the rampant enslaving of the locals, Took wasn't blind for the opportunity it represented. The Republic had to attack, and now, thanks to agents in their government, he knew what his enemy was bringing to the unavoidable battle. The captain was confident in his abilities and forces. Ma knew that against almost any Republic commander, he would be victorious, given the advantages he had. Yet, he felt a pang of anticipation. The Confederation didn't have any records on this new Republic general, besides his recent actions. As such, they had no idea what he would be like in a fleet engagement. This coming battle was going to be interesting. =RK equals. Republic Cruiser Requiem, Task Force Retribution flagship, 12 light seconds from Ryloth. The whirlwind of the hyperspace was replaced with star-filled void as the main body of the fleet jumped back to real space and started accelerating towards Ryloth at a calm pace of 500 gravities. 8 Venatas and 7 Dreadnought heavy cruisers formed 3 vertical lines, with the Leviathan form of the prototype Imperator I-Star destroyer Executrix in the center. All around them, the escorts, led by the 3 flak-modified acclimators Dauntless, Honor, and Warspite, were reforming into defensive formations around the capital ships. Those were 27 Karak light cruisers, all of which were in their anti-fighter variant, which were joined by 23 Arquitans light cruisers and 27 CR-90 corvettes. Launch all fighters, I ordered. While that was being done, I stared at the holographic display showing the disposition of the fleet and that of the enemy. Normally I would have left a 10 to 20% fighter reserve, but we were too heavily outnumbered for that. especially when I was keeping the two acclimator carriers as well as the escort carriers, which were just a bunch of converted freighters, and their escorts as reserve. The armored decks covering the hangars of the Venottas slid open and they started disgorging their brood. Part of me wanted to jump in my new fighter and head out with the pilots, but as a commander of Operation Retribution, that was not my place. I wondered how many of the Jedi generals would have sortied with the fighters if they were in my shoes. It would have been a damn foolish thing to do. At least this early in the battle. Once the reserves were committed and every fighter out there counted, that might change, but for now, my place was on the bridge commanding. Besides, the pilots were in good hands. This is General Skywalker. All wings, form on me. Check your course and stay out of the firing lanes of the big guns. This is Blue Leader. Affirmative, answered Ahsoka, who had her first independent command in this battle. Moment later, the whole screen to my right lit up with green dots showing the fighter wings, which had confirmed their readiness. Few more seconds passed before the powerful sensors of the fleet could partially burn through the enemy ECM. 1 droid command ship, 3 confirmed battleships, 6 possible freighters and 30+ frigates. That and more than 10,000 fighters swarming out of their motherships. Our capital ships had near parity in firepower, which meant that a long-range duel would see both forces decimated. That was something that the Separatists could afford if it meant the destruction of a fleet like mine in exchange. My other alternative was to close in, where my light ships could add their guns to the equation, but that would bring us in the range of the enemy fighters and their capital ships' lighter guns. It would be a double-edged sword. Plus, I was sure that the enemy commander was keeping a reserve too. Plan A was simple. Draw out the enemy fighters and annihilate them, then deal with their battle line. Of course, if their commander decided to send in his reserve early, that would give me other tactical options. 1,438 V-19 Torrent starfighters as well as 2 Jedi-piloted Delta VII would soon meet nearly 10 times their number. Our starfighters punched out until 2/3 of them were at medium range from the fleet, forming a screen against the expected onslaught. The rest stayed behind, forming a CAS, close space patrol. An imaginary line was crossed when the main body of the fleet passed the 10 light-second mark from our targets. "Sir, we are in range," informed me Piet, who was monitoring one of the navigation consoles over the shoulder of its clone operator. "All capital ship, execute Fire Plan Alpha," I ordered calmly. Few seconds passed until the order made it through the chain of command and targets were assigned through Requiem's datanet. The Venottas were divided in pairs, each of which had a separate munificent as its intended victim, and the dreadnoughts divided in 2 groups tracking separate targets. The Executrix targeted 2 of the enemy craft by itself. A second passed. Then a light shudder ran through the deck of the Requiem. 12 dual turbolaser turrets spoke as one. Azure bolts of scarcely comprehensible power flew at the distant cis formation. The rest of the Venottas, dreadnoughts and the Executrix followed suit seconds later. At the same time, our escorts started executing erratic maneuvers, making them much harder targets. The heavy guns of the enemy battleships and frigates answered with a crimson barrage of their own. It was time to start paying the butcher's bill. Enough firepower to decimate continents splashed over straining shields, blinding sensors and scorching hull on the few places where it achieved partial bleed through the defensive fields. Once they entered optimal range, the Venottas shuddered harder as their capital launchers started to unleash their payloads. Heavy proton torpedoes sped towards their distant targets, guided by both the sensors of the ships that launched them and their internal seekers. The first casualty of the battle for Ryloth was a frigate which was under long-range assault by Resolute and Defender. Her shields failed under the relentless onslaught. Turbolaser shots rained over her superstructure, vaporizing armor and opening compartments to space. The starboard side disappeared under a jagged line of explosions, which shattered the ship. The next to fall was a second cis frigate, which was claimed by the Executrix. The prototype's heavy iron cannons of the Star Destroyer battered down her shield with ease, leaving the warship easy prey for the 6 dual heavy turbolasers targeting her. A single salvo struck the center of the ship and blew her in two amidst a colossal explosion. Then was the Separatists' turn to claim their pound of flesh. The dreadnought Undran was battered by 6 enemy ships which soon stripped down her shields. Their heavy cannons blew its weapons blisters one after another, until a rampant chain reaction ran through her brutalized power grid. Her reactors scrammed in a desperate attempt to save the ship, and she fell out of formation as a toothless wreck. An unlucky Carrack cruiser followed suit when she found herself in the way of a battleship barrage aimed at the Redeemer. The small warship was hit by 6 heavy turbo-laser bolts and was torn apart from enough firepower to vaporize a lesser ship. Few of her crew survived in relatively intact compartments, thanks to the highly modular nature of the ship. Anakin hated waiting, especially while the battle was just starting to rage around him. Both fleets were throwing at each other enough firepower to devastate a planet, and that was only the beginning. He knew that not only this battle, but the war itself would become much worse. General Skywalker, execute mirror image. He heard Vale's calm voice over the comm. Affirmative. All Mirage elements, form on me. We are going in. Anakin ordered. Ahsoka and her blue squadron fell in formation to his right. He was about to lead a force of 250 fighters against the swarm of vultures near the Separatists' blockade, in order to encourage them to attack. It was going to be ugly. "Master, is this one of those suicide missions you are famous about?" asked Ahsoka over a private channel. Skywalker snorted at his apprentice's question. "Nah, nothing to worry about, Snips. We've faced worse odds," he said without thinking things through. After a moment of silence, Ahsoka asked, "When?" =RK=. Republic Order of Battle for Operation Retribution. Imperial Line Star Destroyer Executrix, prototype. It carries only starfighters and few shuttles, no other craft or any ground forces besides Ship Security Detachment, 3,000 clone troopers, 300 V-19 starfighters, 7 Dreadnought heavy cruisers, Venator star destroyers, Requiem, Flagship, Victory, Undran, Resolute, Defender, Redeemer, Conviction and Coruscant's Pride. 8 Venators in total. 1,088 V-19 Torrent starfighters, 448 Y-wing bombers. Acclamators SA. Dauntless, Honor, Warspite, all 3 are flak modified, have half of their main armaments replaced with anti-fighter laser turrets. Leveler and Victorious, carrier refits, 120 fighters and 36 bombers. 240 V-19 Torrent starfighters, 72 Y-wing bombers. Light cruisers. Carrack class CL, 32. Arquitans class CL, 23. Frigates. Consular, Medical, 21. Carriers. Escort carriers, PLC 27, Class A bulk freighter, -3 converted into escort carriers, 200 V-19 Torrent starfighter carried by each. 600 V-19 Torrent starfighters in total. Corvettes. CR-90: various configurations. 37. Total small craft strength. V-19 starfighters 2,238, Y-wing bombers, 520. General Del-Qatar Vale's Reserve. Leveler, Victorious, 3 PLC-27 carriers escorted by 6 Carrack CL, 10 CR-90.